Hello, welcome back. Hope you can see me. Hello, Mother. Today I'd like to talk to you about theft. And I'd like to confess to my crimes. So, if Links Police are watching this, here's your opportunity. Come and get me, motherfuckers. So the first time I stole was circa 1975, maybe 74, maybe 76. Time is a difficult one. I figure it was younger because I don't think I was at school. So maybe 1973. I was born in 69. I went to school at 4 or 5, I don't know. So I accompanied my mother to the Central Market in Coventry, where we lived at the time, where I was raised until the age of 12, where I was born. Walsgrave Hospital, where my mother also worked. She worked for the NHS for well over 3 decades. She took me to the market and she was buying vegetables from a fruit stall, fruit and veg. Now, the funny thing is, my mother had worked at that fruit and veg stall on the market prior to leaving school. She was always a grafter, my mother. She once told me that the only things that she paid attention to at school were mathematics and needlework. One, because you needed to count your money, and two, to make clothes last longer. This was Coventry in the early 70s. Everyone was very poor. It was still recovering from the war. Adolf they'd done a bit of a number on Coventry because prior to having the motor industry, we of course had weapons manufacturing, tanks at the Albis, aeroplanes and so on and so forth. So old Adolf popped over fairly regularly, and I'll tell you about my grandmother facing down a Ju-99 Stuka dive bomber once. It's on the front page of the Coventry Evening Telegraph. And after she'd faced down and shaken her fist at the Luftwaffe, she was on the front page of the Telegraph, and when she was interviewed, she said, "Well, I'd been to the butchers and the bakers, and I still had the grocers to get to, and this bugger was interfering." So as everyone else ran for the air raid shelters, my mother walked along the Stony Stanton Road with very large aeroplane machine guns strafing either side of her, and she just raised her shopping bags above her head and shook her fists because they were getting in her way and she had tea to get. They breed the women in my family of stern stuff made of marble. My mother's only 4 foot nothing, and her mother was even shorter. Tenacious Irish Fagan women out of Connemara. Well, my grandfather was. The Catholics, who knows. Anyway, my mother and I had gone unescorted by anyone else, so this is what makes me think I was preschool, to the market, and I'm just a knee-high brat in shorts, and we stood at the veg, and my mum I was bored, obviously, a little kid. My mum was having a chat with the grocer. She's buying potatoes and fucking swede. Swede is the devil's root vegetable. No one should eat it, it's horse food. However, that's all we bought, bog trotter food, potatoes and variants thereof. God knows what the Irish did before we discovered the potatoes in the New World. Anyway, ate turf, probably. So she's buying the really uninteresting vegetables, and I'm seeing laid out on, he had the fake green grass overflowing his stall. And while my mother was talking, she previously worked there at 16 or 15 when she was a girl, and obviously they were friends. And right in my eye line, draped over the stall front of the fake green grass, were grapes. Now, I'd seen grapes, but I'd never tasted one. And my mother's talking and they're doing what adults do at that age, and I'm totally bored. And I saw this grape in front of me, hanging down from a bunch. Like Bacchus himself was testing me. And it was green and large and had dew on it. It was early morning. And I just saw this glistening fruit, as though hanging from a bough in the Garden of Eden. And I reached out, I took it, and I put it in my mouth. And I crushed it. And it was a taste sensation. Juice I'd never tasted. So sweet, so pure, so frankly beautiful. I never tasted anything like it. We didn't have sweets in those days. The Jamaicans across the road would occasionally give us sugar cane to gnaw on. And we kids would walk along the road munching on sugar cane. And that was the closest I got to something as delicious as a grape. So I reached out in my youth, plucked this grape from its bunch, popped it in my mouth, crushed it, and was in heaven. The joy from the theft lasted only a mere few seconds, as straight away the grocer yelled, "Thief! Thief!" and pointed at me repeatedly, attracting attention from all the other lady shoppers with headscarves and far too thick coats, including my mother. She turned to me and said, "I cannot believe that I've raised a son who is a thief. I'm so ashamed." Meanwhile, the grocer was saying, "I'm calling the police. You're going to jail." Now, to my 4-year-old self, I was going to jail. I was going to the boys' home. I'd never see my parents again. That was it. My life was over. I'm branded a thief. They might even kill me. In retrospect, with hindsight, it's possible that the grocer and my mother were having a bit of a laugh. It was a secret joke between them. But that didn't matter to me. I may have wet myself in my grey flannel shorts. So terrified was I. But it was a salutary lesson, and I didn't steal again for 20 years. So that was my first theft, and I admit to it, and I apologise. Thou shalt not steal. I know the fucking Bible. I know the Ten Commandments. I knew it then. I knew it was wrong. I did it almost unthinking. I think the devil came and took me, and I became a thief. And that's when I became a thief. Age of 4. Stole a grape. It was a salutary lesson. I didn't steal again for another 20 years. Spin forward 20 years, 1998. So maybe longer, maybe 25 years actually. And I'm in my final year at university, and we were skint in those days. I didn't have a student loan. I didn't have to pay tuition fees, but we were poor. We're not like modern students who live off the fat off the loan, borrowing on a future they cannot prescribe and will possibly never afford. We lived on a meagre income. I think I got $2,800 a year. Previously, I'd been flying high. I was a manager of several successful businesses, bakeries. I ran a bakery and coffee shop in Felixstowe in Suffolk, and I was the manager at a very tender age. And then I left all that and decided to go back to university because I'd left school at 16. When I was 25, I was upset with the baking industry and how it had become processed, and they de-skilled it. I was a craft baker, and in those days, no one was prepared to pay for a loaf of bread what it cost to produce. You had the Milton Keynes process, Google that fucker, where they basically make water stand up and it has very little nutritional value. And that was the bread of the day, the Mother's Pride white slice loaf that you could squeeze to see if it was fresh. That again is a lie. They put ascorbic acid and vinegar in it to give the impression of fluffiness, but it was total shit. I didn't produce that. I was trained, apprenticed to A.W. Curtis and Sons in Lincoln at the age of 16 and cycled 7 miles each way at 5 in the morning to and from work, working 6 days a week. I left school on the Friday, started work on the Monday, and immediately took to a 60-hour week, which I kept up for many, many years. Still do. So then I jacked all that in. I was dissatisfied with them de-skilling the bakery. Instead, they took away our mixers, they took away the skill, and then we were buying in frozen goods that we basically just flash baked. Think Greggs, but earlier. An outfit called Don Miller's Hot Bread Kitchen. And it was a good bakery when I joined it. But then they were subsequently bought out by Whitworths, who de-skilled it, and I lost interest. So I'd been interested in philosophy, always been a reader, and I'd got an interest in philosophy by that time. Did my A-levels at night school whilst working 60 hours a week and renovating a house, which I'd bought at auction, and got into University of Essex at Colchester. I lived in Felixstowe, wasn't that far. I ended up moving to Colchester, renting the house out anyway. It wasn't the original intention, but it worked okay. And in my final year, we were dead poor. I mean, even in those days, trying to survive on a couple of grand a year was, when I'd been used to 20 grand a year, was quite a shock. Although it was good because we were all poor, so we found inexpensive activities, let's put it that way. We were very, very creative. Remember frequenting a restaurant in Colchester called Karl Marx, probably not there anymore, but you could take your own booze and they'd charge you a very minor corkage fee and supply you with a couple of glasses. So we'd take in the cheapest Thunderbird wine, pay 50p to have a couple of glasses and get it corked, and they did 2 meals, a veggie one and a meaty one, and it was all you can eat. So as students on no money, we thought it was fantabulous, and many happy hours were spent eating as much as we could. Probably some days it was all we ate. In fact, some occasions it's probably all we ate for a couple of days. And I was so skint. We went to near the university. There's a crazy roundabout that the man who designed it committed suicide because it was such a crazy thing. It was one big roundabout surrounded by another 4 or 5 satellite roundabouts. No one knew what the bloody hell they were doing, and there were constant crashes there. But next to that, there was a supermarket. I believe it was a Tesco. I'm sure it was a Tesco. Many of the students used it. I went in there, and I needed a new toothbrush. My toothbrush had worn down. You know, imagine that these days. A toothbrush that had so worn, its bristles were 2 millimetres long, and there weren't many of them. I needed a new toothbrush. So I went to buy a toothbrush in this Tesco whilst doing other shopping for out-of-date goods with the other students. Excuse me, I might have to do something with a fire because I'm roasting. Yeah, let me just damp this bugger down. Right. Sorry, dog. Poor dog's roasted. I'm going to open the oven to vent it a little bit more. Anyway, whoa, roasting. Toasty. That's made it lighter. The sun's come out. So I went to shop for a toothbrush and I saw a toothbrush that was £20. This is 1998 and it was £20 exactly. It wasn't 19.99. It was £20. It was like, you can buy all these toothbrushes, like 85 pence, or you can have this bugger. And it was a strange black ergonomic design, and I've always been a freak for good design. Still am. I'm going to have to move. Oh, too hot to get up. Got a hot dog with a hot pot. That's better. Anyway, so yeah, you might as well. There we go. So I saw it and I wanted it. I thought, how good can this toothbrush be that it's 25 times the price of the next newest toothbrush? And I stole it. Sorry, Tesco, I owe you 20 quid. In fact, years later, I did actually just drop a £20 note on the floor in a Tesco. Just pay them back. So yeah, that was the second theft, 1998. So we've gone from 1974 to 1998. I'm now back at my thieving best, but felt such hideous shame that I did actually go to Tesco and throw £20 on the floor a couple of years later, I think. And just, oh no, I may have even picked it up and given it to a member of staff. Said, oh, found this on the floor. They wouldn't give it to a member of staff. They wouldn't give it to a customer. They'd have just thrown it in their coffers. So they got their dollar back without interest. Usury is evil. Anyway, that was that. The next theft I did was a large plastic tub. This was now in Lincoln, and this is 2008. So we've moved on. It's only 10 years, 25 years between my first two thefts, and then only 10. So it's obviously, there's a pattern here. I'm increasingly becoming a criminal. Yeah. And it was a large plastic tub that was on some waste ground. Now I know who it belonged to because they had their name firmly stamped on the top, on the side. Now I really needed one, just that size, but it was very expensive for me to buy a durable plastic tub of such a size. I think this thing held about 300 litres. And it was abandoned on some waste ground. Now I watched it for several weeks, months, and no one moved it. No one reclaimed it. So in my head, I said, well, it's out in the sun, so we know what happens with thermoplastics out in the sun, and particularly this type, which is kind of a polyurethane mix. It would have become brittle in the sunlight and eventually cracked, which would have rendered it absolutely useless to the company who owned it, and indeed to myself. So having watched it not be taken, not be reclaimed, and just being degrading, I justified to myself that I could take it away because it was going to break, be useless as its actual function, be a hazard for the company to get rid of and cost them lots of money, and leach plastics into the environment, which, as we all know, finds its way to the ocean and kills magnificent creatures like blue whales. So I justified it in my head, but it was still theft. I stole it, I used it, and eventually recycled it. That's the end of my thieving. I have not stolen since. The guilt was far too much, and I would never replicate such a criminal enterprise. So this is my confessional. Thou shalt not steal. This is me admitting to the theft. Come and get me, Links Police. Throw me in the slammer. I can't wait for you to put me in prison. I'll come out with an army. Thank you for listening, and I'm sorry there's not been any music or hilarity, but I did need to get that off my chest. Love, like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next one. Thank you.